The tunnel of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta felt like a pressurized chamber. On one side stood the Spanish national team, a billion-dollar assembly of elite precision, youth, and European royalty. On the other stood a man who, 48 hours earlier, had officially become a 40-year-old without a job. Yosimar José Evora, known to the world only as Vozinha, adjusted his gloves one final time. He was not supposed to be here, not at this age, not with his club career in a state of total collapse. The cameras panned past the teenage superstars of Barcelona and Real Madrid, barely lingering on the veteran from Cape Verde. He was a footnote, a statistical anomaly, a man whose presence felt like a clerical error in the grand architecture of the 2026 World Cup. But within 90 minutes, the world would realize that some stories are not written by scouts or algorithms. They are forged in the silence of decades. Why did the world's most resilient goalkeeper wait a lifetime for a single night of recognition? To understand the tears that would eventually flood the Atlanta turf, we have to travel back to the dust. The timeline of Vozinha does not begin in a high-tech academy. It begins in Mindelo, on the island of São Vicente, where the Atlantic wind carries the scent of salt and the weight of impossible dreams. In the late 1980s, football in Cape Verde was not a career path. It was a survival mechanism. The young Josimar grew up in a house defined by absence. His father, José Pedro, was stationed on a distant island for military service. His mother, Anna, was a ghost of labor, working grueling hours to keep the family from falling into the abyss of poverty. This left Josimar in the care of his grandparents. They were the architects of his soul. They were the ones who watched him return home every evening, covered in the red dirt of the street pitches. He was smaller than the others. He was frequently targeted. In the brutal hierarchy of street football, the older boys sought to break his spirit. When the tackles became too violent or the mockery too loud, Josimar would walk away. He would retreat to the only sanctuary he knew, his grandparents' porch. The bullies saw this retreat and gave him a name. They called him Vozinha. It means little grandmother in the local Creole. It was meant to be a slur. It was a label of perceived weakness, mocking a boy who sought the comfort of the elderly. He hated it. He fought it. But in the strange alchemy of fate, the name stuck. He could not have known that he was carrying the legacy of his protectors into every stadium he would ever enter. The official records tell a different story of his identity. His father was obsessed with the 1986 World Cup. He wanted to name his son after Jorge Valdano, the Argentine legend. The local registry office, however, refused to allow a foreign name. They compromised on Josimar after the Brazilian right-back who lit up that same tournament. This was the first contradiction of his life. His official name belonged to a world champion. His nickname belonged to a grandmother. He spent the next 35 years trying to reconcile the two. By 2007, the timeline enters a period of profound obscurity. While European prodigies were signing multi-million-dollar deals at 17, Vozinha was playing for Batuk FC, then Mindelense. These are proud clubs, but they exist in the shadows of the global game. For 5 long years, he stood between the posts on pitches that would make an elite striker weep. There were no scouts here. There were no highlights on social media. There was only the repetitive, agonizing work of a man refining a craft that no one seemed to want. This is where most stories end. In the ruthless economy of professional sports, if you haven't made it by 23, you are considered a failed product. By 25, Vozinha was still in Cape Verde. He was watching his peers settle into real jobs. He was facing the terrifying reality that his dream might just be a slow-motion tragedy. He later admitted that the urge to quit was a daily companion. It was a physical weight. But a goalkeeper is built differently. A goalkeeper is the only person on the pitch who is allowed to use their hands to stop progress. He decided to stop the progress of his own failure. In 2012, At an age when many players are entering their prime, Vozinha finally left home. He didn't go to London or Madrid. He went to Angola. He joined Progresso de Sambizanga. It was a gamble of absolute desperation. He was betting his entire future on his ability to survive the Girabola, a league known for its physicality and unforgiving pressure. It worked. His performances caught the eye of the national team scouts. At 26, he finally made his international debut. The timeline was moving, but it was moving in slow motion. The next decade was a nomadic odyssey. He moved to Moldova to play for Zimbru Chisinau. Think about that transition. From the tropical heat of Mindelo to the freezing, isolated winters of Eastern Europe. He lived in hotel rooms where the silence was deafening. He played in front of small crowds in stadiums that felt like relics of a different era. He moved to Portugal to play for Gil Vicente, then to Cyprus for 5 years with AEL Limassol. In Cyprus, he finally tasted silverware, lifting the cup in 2019. But even then, he was a journeyman, a reliable veteran, a safe pair of hands. He was never the star. He was the man who kept the stars from shining. This brings us to the mid-script revelation. As the 2026 World Cup qualifiers began, Vozinha was nearly 40. Most goalkeepers at that age are coaching or playing in retirement leagues. But Vozinha had spent his entire life in the shadows, which meant his fire hadn't been extinguished by the glare of fame. He played every single minute of the qualifying campaign. 10 matches, 7 clean sheets. He was the reason a nation of 500,000 people was suddenly dreaming of the world stage. Yet, as the tournament approached, the industry showed its teeth. His club in Portugal, GD Chaves, decided not to renew his contract. This wasn't a series of isolated mistakes. It was exactly how the system was designed to work. The system values the future, and at 40, Vozinha was seen as the past. He arrived in the United States as a free agent. He was a man playing for his country while technically being unemployed. The psychological burden was immense. If he failed on the world stage, there would be no safety net, no club to return to, just the quiet end of a long, dusty road. June 15, 2026, Atlanta. The match against Spain was supposed to be a slaughter. Spain had 27 shots. They held the ball for 75% of the game. It was a siege, but in the center of that storm stood a man who had spent 20 years preparing for this specific chaos. In the 34th minute, Ferran Torres unleashed a strike that seemed destined for the top corner. Vozinha, with joints that had survived Moldovan winters and Angolan sun, defied physics. He tipped it over. In the 62nd minute, a point-blank header from Mikel Oyarzabal was clawed off the line. It wasn't just athleticism, it was geometry. It was the ability to read the striker's eyes before the ball even left the grass. He was playing a different game. While the Spanish players were playing for glory, Vozinha was playing for his grandparents. He was playing for every year he spent in the dark. When the final whistle blew, the scoreboard read 0-0. It was the greatest result in the history of Cape Verdean football. The world expected him to celebrate. They expected a lap of honor. Instead, Vozinha collapsed. He fell to the turf and buried his face in his gloves. He wasn't just tired, he was breaking. When the cameras finally reached him, he wasn't talking about his 7 saves. He wasn't talking about being the player of the match. He was talking about the 2 people who weren't there. His grandparents had passed away years before this moment. They had given him the name Vozinha to protect him, and now the entire world was shouting it. The grief was as loud as the stadium. The viral explosion that followed was unprecedented. Within 48 hours, his social media following jumped from 50,000 to 15 million. The old man of the World Cup became a global icon. But fame is a shallow reward for a man who has lived through the depths. 6 days later, the team moved to Miami to face Uruguay. The humidity was suffocating. The stakes were even higher, but the atmosphere had shifted. In the stands of the Miami Stadium sat a woman who had missed the Atlanta miracle. Ana Candida Evora, Vozinha's mother, had finally cleared the bureaucratic hurdles to see her son. She had watched him through a screen for 20 years. Now, she was there to see the little grandmother lead a nation. The match ended in a 2-2 draw. Another historic point. Another masterclass in defiance. When Vozinha looked into the stands and saw his mother, the timeline finally felt complete. The absence that had defined his childhood was replaced by a presence that validated his entire struggle. But we must look closer at the cost of this endurance. Professional football at 40 is a form of self-inflicted torture. Every dive is a car crash. Every sprint is a gamble with a tendon. Standing across from him in that tournament was Lamine Yamal, an 18-year-old who was born 4 years after Vozinha had already started playing senior football. The gap between them was more than just years. It was an entire era of the sport. Yamal represents the modern machine, scouted at 6, nurtured in luxury, destined for the top. Vozinha represents the old world, forged in neglect, hardened by rejection, and arriving at the top only when his body was ready to break. The wider implication of Vozinha's story is a devastating critique of how we scout talent. How many Vozinhas have we lost because they weren't prodigies at 16? How many great players are discarded at 35 because a spreadsheet says they are declining? Vozinha proved that the mind of a veteran is a weapon that no amount of youth can replicate. He didn't save those shots because he was faster than the Spanish strikers. He saved them because he was wiser. He knew where the ball was going before the striker had even decided to shoot. He was playing a game of chess while the world thought he was playing a game of reflexes. As the tournament progressed, the fame didn't change him. He remained the same stoic, quiet man who had survived the shadows. He refused to sign lucrative brand deals mid-tournament. He told reporters to stop talking about his Instagram followers and start talking about the tactical discipline of his defenders. This was a man who understood that fame is temporary, but respect is earned in the mud. He was still technically unemployed, but he no longer cared. He had achieved something that no contract could provide. He had made his name immortal. The final image of Vozinha is not one of him holding a trophy. It is an image of him in the dressing room, alone, removing the tape from his battered fingers. The World Cup will end. The lights will go out. The 15 million followers will eventually move on to the next viral sensation. But for 1 month in the summer of 2026, a 40-year-old man from a small island chain showed the world that it is never too late to be seen. He carried the weight of a nickname meant to mock him and turned it into a badge of the highest honor. He didn't just play for Cape Verde. He played for every person who has ever been told they are too old, too invisible, or too far behind. He played for the grandparents who raised him, and the mother who worked herself to the bone to keep him fed. His story is a reminder that the timeline of greatness doesn't have to follow a straight line. It can be jagged, it can be slow, it can be painful. But if you stay in the game long enough, the world eventually has no choice but to learn your name. As he walked off the pitch for the final time, the red dirt of Mindelo was long gone, replaced by the pristine turf of global stadiums. But the boy who ran home to his grandparents was still there, hidden behind the beard and the veteran's eyes. He had finally answered the question that had haunted him for 40 years. He wasn't just a little grandmother. He was a giant. He was a man who held the world at bay with nothing but his hands and his history. The silence of his career is finally over. The recognition is absolute. But as he sits in the quiet of his hotel room, looking at the gloves that have finally done their job, he knows the truth. The world finally saw him, but he had been there all along. He was just waiting for us to catch up. The stadium is empty now. The roar has faded. There is only the sound of the wind. A 40-year-old man stands at the edge of the pitch, looking at the horizon. He has no club. He has no certain future. He has only the memory of a night when he was the best in the world. And for Vozinha, that is more than enough.